Welcome everybody to Forza Horizon 4, and today we're taking a look at the 1967 Chevelle Super Sport 396. Now this is part of the first generation that was produced between 1963 and 1967, with this version being not only the top model, as it's the SS version with the largest engine, but it was also part of the new facelift that occurred in 1966 and 1967, before it inevitably changed over to a new generation with the more infamous 1970 Chevelle SS taken over from this. So yeah, this car I personally prefer over that 1970 Chevelle, which is probably controversial because most people see that Chevelle as, you know, the ultimate kind of muscle car with a higher rate of power, 500 pound-feet of torque and the like. But for me personally, this is the better version. It's a little bit better in terms of looks as far as I'm concerned. I prefer the engine. And yeah, this is a car that's faster at the top end, but this car in its own right is really rather good, even on its own merits. And yeah, I like the interior, especially like the sideways speedometer that it has going on, a staple of many American cars in the 60s and 70s. And yeah, nice simple interior, everything where it needs to be, everything where you'd expect, and yeah, nothing too complicated, but really rather classic in its own right. And it's got plenty of space in the rear, as you can see, which is, I guess, no surprise when there's a car of this size. And yeah, equally of no surprise is how much room is in the rear, in the boot there. So yeah, practical, good looking muscle car that also has a really rather good engine under the hood. Like I said, top of the line engine, 6.5 litre big block V8 engine, producing 375 horsepower and 415 pounds-feet of torque, which is pretty good. Not the most that you'll ever see from a muscle car in the 60s and the early 70s, but well and truly up there. And yeah, it's certainly more than the car I'm going to be comparing this against, the 1965 Pontiac GTO, as that had 15 horsepower less than this, though granted it did have 9 pounds-feet of torque more. But yeah, I'm comparing it against the GTO purely because they look really rather similar, especially in terms of side profile and rear end. And yeah, also similar in terms of power, as you just stated. And yeah, also obviously front engine and rear wheel drive. And yeah, both muscle cars from the mid 60s. So yeah, though for my money there's also big differences between them, as well as big similarities. Me personally, I find this to be a better handling vehicle. It's got better brakes, and yeah, even though it weighs 117 pounds more than the GTO at 3,585 pounds, it also handles better. It's got a higher revving engine at 6,000 RPM. It's obviously got slightly more horsepower. I think it sounds better in terms of engine, and yeah, even though I can't really split them on looks, this is slightly worse because I don't like the painted metal there in between the dashboard and the windscreen wipers. Overall, looks wise, there's no real difference between them as far as I'm concerned in terms of how much I like them, but it all comes down to performance and how the both drive between one another, quite frankly. So yeah, to see how different they drive and how this drives in its own right, let's get out there and see what it can do. So despite the fact that these both the GTO and this have similar power levels and similar sized engines, this is actually slightly slower to 60 and to 100 than the GTO, not just because of that extra bit of weight that this car has, but also because of the gearing on this. The gearing on this is a lot longer than that on the GTO. So as a result, this can do 0 to 60 in 6.5 seconds, 0 to 100 in 15.4 seconds, and going to a top speed of 159 miles an hour. So yeah, in comparison, the GTO can do 0 to 60 in 5.740 seconds and 0 to 113.280 seconds. So there is quite a significant difference in terms of acceleration there. You're talking more than 2 seconds slower to 100, and yeah, not far off a second slower to 60. But to be honest, this is still plenty quick enough. And yeah, because it does have that longer gearing, you do have the upside of this having a far higher top speed, as the GTO can only do 129 miles an hour, so you're talking a 30 mile an hour difference there, which is a pretty big gap, to be honest. quite frankly a far bigger gap than the 0 to 60, 0 to 100 times as far as I'm concerned. Though obviously in the GTO's defence, acceleration is obviously a lot more usable on a day-to-day basis, and yeah, in terms of quarter-mile drag racing and stuff like that, obviously the GTO would beat this in terms of you know, getting past that finish line in time. So yeah, that's just a trade-off really of whether or not you want short gearing or long gearing really, and to be honest, I think this is still just about, you know, quick enough, with the advantage of having a higher top speed to really not make all that much of a difference in terms of how much I like this. But to be honest, it's the handling and the braking that makes this the better vehicle over the Pontiac. As yeah, even though it does roll around a fair bit still like the Pontiac, and on occasion will oversteer madly, it's just far more controllable and yeah, far more enjoyable to drive. It just hangs in there that little bit better, and yeah, handles that bit better due to the you know, the fact it's able to use its power more regularly, if you know what I mean, because this isn't getting its power in big lumpfuls like the GTO is, and obviously having that slightly little less torque also helps as well in terms of controllability. But the fact that this car's power comes on more gradually due to it having a higher RPM limit and longer gearing means that this is just that little bit more controllable, which is again despite the fact that this weighs more, has slightly more weight up front than the GTO. So yeah, really do prefer this in some ways to the GTO, though obviously the GTO is a far more classic vehicle, looks far more classic than this, and yeah, obviously this did get overshadowed a fair bit by the next generation Chevelle, which had more power, more torque from a bigger engine, and yeah, went for the shorter gearing like the GTO to have a much faster acceleration times. But like I said, I do prefer this over that next generation Chevelle, and in some ways I do prefer it to the GTO, though I am glad that both of them are on the game, because yeah, the more classic muscle cars are better as far as I'm concerned, and yeah, this is another one of those classics that should always be in a Forza game, quite frankly. Not sure whether or not it was in previous Forza Horizon or previous Forza Motorsport game, but either way, having it on this game with the GTO and other classic muscle cars as well is always a treat. And yeah, despite my reservations about it having that little bit of extra weight, a couple of design quirks on it that aren't quite as nice as the GTO, and obviously not being as quick in terms of acceleration, it's still very charismatic in terms of what it can do, and at the end of the day I do find it a bit more fun to drive than the GTO, despite obviously having the lesser acceleration times. But like I said, it does make up for it in terms of the top speed, which is easily one of the best top speeds from a muscle car from this period. A lot of the muscle cars from this period were around the GTO's top speed, 129 to about 140ish, whereas this, you know, nudging 160, which is, you know, verging on a supercar territory from the time. So yeah, really do like this, and yeah, hope to see more classic muscle cars. I know we do have the Buick GSX coming in a future festival season playlist, which I can't wait for. But whether or not we're going to get any more is really up in the air, quite frankly. But I would like to see more, as there are plenty out there that we have yet to really experience on a Forza game. Nonetheless, thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye.